With her dying breath, my mother looked at my father and ordered, "Marry our daughter. Abuse her until she breaks or dies. Swear it to me." The horror wasn't in that woman's command, but in the obedience everyone showed her, even after death. Good morning, my dear viewers. What a blessing to be here talking with you today. My name is Lucy Bennett. I'm 79 years old with plenty of stories to share from my long life. I currently live in Pennville, a small town in rural Kentucky that most folks have never heard of. But it's become my peaceful haven after a life of turmoil. I wasn't born here. I was born far away in Penneridge, Oregon, a logging town with timber mills and cold winters. But life has its winding paths, doesn't it? Here in Pennville, my routine is simple and dedicated to caring for my father, Joseph. Yes, my father is still alive at 2 years old, a miracle from God. As Sister Margaret from our local church says, he's been bedridden for almost 5 years, since he had a stroke that paralyzed nearly his entire right side. Now I'm the one caring for him, just as he cared for me when I needed him most. I wake up every day before sunrise around 5:00 a.m. First, I check if my father had a good night. I change the sheets if necessary, give him his morning medications, and prepare his breakfast. It has to be oatmeal with cinnamon, just the way he likes it. Sometimes when he's feeling better, I make cornbread or apple muffins, his favorites. My father can barely speak anymore, but his eyes, oh my dears, his eyes still have that sparkle from when I was little. When he tastes something good I've prepared, he closes his eyes and smiles with the corner of his mouth that still responds. It's that little smile that makes each day worthwhile. It's my small victory. Mid-morning after the nurse Judy comes to bathe him, because I no longer have the strength in my arms to turn him myself, I sit in the chair beside his bed and read to him. Sometimes it's news from the paper. Other times passages from the Bible or stories we've made up together over the years. He can't speak anymore, but I know when he's paying attention because his eyebrows move as if he's conversing with me in a code. Only we understand. In the afternoon, when the weather's nice, I take his wheelchair to the porch. Our house is simple, but it has a beautiful view of the valley and mountains in the distance. We sit there watching the birds, feeling the breeze, sometimes in silence, sometimes with my conversations filling the air. Then I prepare dinner, always soup, because it's easier for him to swallow. I make different soups each day. Chicken and dumplings, vegetable, beef, and barley that I buy from neighbor Dorothy. It was my niece Maline who encouraged me to start this channel. "Aunt Lucy, your stories can't die with you," she told me one day. "You need to share them with more people so others can learn from what you've lived through." At first, I thought it was silly. Who would want to listen to an old lady like me? But she insisted, set everything up, taught me how to talk to this camera, and here I am recording while my father sleeps, talking to all of you as if you were sitting right here in my living room. I'm recording from my simple but tidy living room. Behind me is a bookshelf with some books and family photos. To the side is the partially open door to my father's room, because even while recording, I stay alert to any small sound he might make if he needs me. And you, my dear viewers, tell me in the comments which town you're watching from, and what time of day you found this old woman talking. Do you have a cup of coffee in your hand like me? Or is it already time for afternoon tea? I always read all the comments and feel so happy knowing who you are, and where you're speaking from. Let me know. Okay, leave a like too to make this grandma happy. Today I'm going to tell you a difficult story. A story about families, about the power some people hold over others, and how that power can poison entire generations. It's a story about my mother, my father, and how we escaped a terrible fate planned down to the last breath. It's not easy to remember these things. But as my dear friend Theodora, God rest her soul, used to say, a wound that isn't clean never truly heals. And perhaps by telling you this story, I'll help someone who's living their own silent nightmare behind closed doors. Because the worst prison, my children, is the one built with blood ties and orders no one dares question. I was born and raised in Penneridge, Oregon, logging country and sawmills. In the 1940s, it was a place of hard work and little conversation, where winter brought frosts that whitened everything, and the smell of smoke from homes, mixed with the aroma of pine forests. Our house was away from the center on a small red dirt road that turned to mud when it rained. It was a simple wooden house that creaked with the cold of night, with just 3 rooms. The kitchen with a wood stove, that was the heart of the home, a bedroom where my parents slept, and another tiny one where I slept. My father, Joseph Bennett, worked as a foreman at one of the region's lumber mills. He was a handsome man of average height, but with strong arms from hard work. He had kind brown eyes that smiled before his mouth did, and dark hair, always well trimmed. He was naturally quiet, but when he spoke, he had a gentle voice that seemed to calm even the neighbors' mean dogs. Everyone in the community respected my father for his honesty, and for how he treated the workers under his supervision. My mother, Irene Alden Bennett, was the complete opposite. Tall, thin, with small, dark eyes that seemed to pierce through you like needles. She had a presence that chilled the room. She worked as a teacher at the town's only school, teaching the younger children. Her students trembled with fear, and parents, even when they disagreed with her harsh methods, never dared question her. Mrs. Bennett knows what she's doing, they would say, averting their eyes. At home, she was the absolute queen. Every detail of our lives was controlled by her. The time to wake up and sleep, what to wear, what to eat, how to make the bed, how to hold the fork, how to breathe. Yes, how to breathe. Because if I breathed too hard, she would say, "Stop snorting like an animal, girl." If I breathed too softly, she would complain, "Are you dying? Speak up, I can't hear that mosquito voice." Our day began at 5:00 a.m. with the rooster barely awake. I would get up, wash my face with ice-cold water, even in the harshest winter. My mother said cold, tempered character. I'd braid my hair and put on my school uniform, which was always ironed the night before. In the kitchen, I helped prepare breakfast, milk and porridge for me, black coffee and toast for the adults. Everything had to be on the table when my father came in from the yard where he'd already fed the chickens and chopped wood for the stove. Meals were silent. My mother didn't allow conversation at the table. She said mouths were made for eating, not chattering. If I dropped a utensil or made any noise, her eyes would glare at me, and I knew there would be punishment later. My father would just lower his eyes to his plate, eating quickly and silently. He only spoke if my mother asked him something, and even then he answered with few words. At school where my mother taught, it was perhaps even worse. She never showed that we were from the same family. She treated me with the same calculated coldness she gave other students, perhaps with even more rigor, as if she needed to prove she showed no favoritism. If I got a question wrong, she made me stand in front of everyone while she pointed out my mistakes. "See how not to do it," she would say. And the other students, relieved not to be the target, would just lower their heads in silent gratitude for having been spared. My few joys came in those rare moments when I was alone with my father. On Sunday afternoons, when my mother visited her sister, Olia, who lived on the other side of town, my father would take me walking in the pine forests. There, away from her watchful eyes, he changed, smiled, showed me birds, taught me tree names, told stories of when he was young. Once he showed me how to make a whistle from an oak leaf, and we laughed together at the shrill sound it made. It was one of the few times I saw him truly laugh. "One day it will be different, Lucy," he would say, using the nickname forbidden at home. "One day we'll be able to talk without fear." I had few friends. My mother wouldn't allow me to play with other children after school. She said playing was a waste of time and that I should study or help with housework. Girls my age found me strange, too quiet, always afraid of doing something wrong. Boys avoided me, because nobody wanted to get close to the witch's daughter, as they called my mother behind her back. There was only Elizabeth, daughter of Mrs. Zoe, who sued for the town. Elizabeth was brave in a way I could never be. She wasn't afraid of anything, not even my mother. Once when we were in 3rd grade, my mother reprimanded her in front of the class for having messy socks. Elizabeth looked her straight in the eyes and said, "You worry too much about little things, Mrs. Bennett." The entire room went silent, waiting for the explosion, but my mother just pressed her lips together and told Elizabeth to sit down. It was the only time I saw someone confront her without immediate consequences. Elizabeth and I would play secretly, in her backyard, where there was a small creek. We made rag dolls from fabric scraps Mrs. Zoe gave us and created stories where we were princesses, explorers, anything but who we really were. She was my only window to a different world where not everything was fear and rules. My father, however, lived a shadow existence. In public, he was respected and even admired. Men called on him to settle disputes because they trusted his judgment. But at home, in my mother's presence, he seemed to shrink into himself. She interrupted him, corrected him, humiliated him with words sharp as razors. "Shut up, Joseph. You don't understand any of this. Or if I depended on your intelligence, we'd be living under a bridge and he would just bow his head and accept it." Sometimes when she was cruel, I saw his eyes water, but he never cried in front of her. I think he cried in hiding as I did. The only time I saw my father stand up to her was when she wanted to take me out of school after 4th grade. "Girls don't need more education than that," she said. "You'll work with me at home. Learn to be a real woman." It was the only time my father hit the table and raised his voice. "No, the girl will continue her studies." My mother was so surprised she didn't answer right away. Later, of course, she made him pay for that boldness with weeks of cutting silence and small cruelties. But he didn't back down. And so I continued in school. Those years formed in me a frightened girl who measured every word, every gesture, every breath. I learned to become almost invisible, to anticipate moods, to anticipate orders. My childhood was like walking in a minefield, never knowing when the next step would cause an explosion. And my father, my poor father, was like a bird with clipped wings, who knew he should fly, but had forgotten how. When I turned 13 in 1959, something changed in our house. It wasn't a big visible change. It was like those fine cracks that appear in walls before a collapse. My mother, always rigid, began to become even more unpredictable. There were days when she woke up silent with deep, dark circles and barely spoke to us. Other days when she seemed feverish, talking non-stop about things that didn't always make sense. She lost weight. The bones of her face became more pronounced, and her skin acquired a yellowish tone that no face powder could disguise. That year, the town doctor, Dr. Albert, began visiting our house. He would always come after dinner with his worn leather bag and smell of alcohol and medicine. He and my mother would lock themselves in the bedroom, and my father and I would stay in the kitchen in silence, pretending not to hear the violent coughs coming from inside. When the doctor left, my father would walk him to the gate, where they spoke in low voices, and he would return looking even more downcast. "What's wrong with Mother?" I asked one night, while helping my father wash the dinner dishes, one of the few moments we could exchange some words without her around. He was silent for so long that I thought he hadn't heard me. Finally, without looking me in the eyes, he said, "She's sick in the lungs. It's serious." That same week, the house routine changed. My mother stopped teaching, something unimaginable until then, and spent most of the day in bed. The tasks she had previously supervised with an iron hand now all fell on me. Cleaning the house, cooking, washing, and ironing clothes. At 13, I was already the woman of the house, with my father helping when he could, but always careful not to contradict her orders. Even sick, my mother lost none of her cruelty. In fact, the disease seemed to have intensified her bitterness. From her bedroom, she shouted orders and criticism. If the food wasn't the way she wanted, she threw the plate on the floor. If the house wasn't clean to her impossible standards, she called me lazy, useless, incapable. "You're not even good for that," she would say with that hoarse voice the disease had left her with. "How will you ever find a husband being so useless? You're not even fit to take care of your own mother." The strangest thing about this time, though, was the way she treated my father. Before she humiliated him, belittled him, but now there was something different in the air, a kind of sick possessiveness. "Come here, Joseph," she would order from the bedroom. And when he went, she would grip his wrist with surprising strength for someone so weakened. "You won't leave me, will you? Promise you won't leave me." And my father, with that meekness of always promised every day like a ritual, while she dug her nails into his arm, until almost drawing blood. It was during this time that I noticed changes in my father's behavior toward me. No, don't misunderstand me. My father never ever harmed me, or looked at me inappropriately. The problem was exactly the opposite. He began to avoid me. If before we had those small moments of closeness, now he could barely stay in the same room with me without seeming uncomfortable. He no longer called me Lucy, barely looked me in the eyes. One afternoon, While I was hanging sheets on the clothesline in the backyard, I heard an argument coming from their bedroom. I couldn't hear the exact words, but the tone was clear. My mother was accusing, my father denying, she insisting with that harsh voice of someone losing control. Suddenly, the bedroom door opened violently and my father came out almost running. He passed me without saying anything, his face red and eyes watery, and went to the woods behind the house. He only came back late at night, smelling of whiskey, something that had never happened before. A few weeks later, at the beginning of winter, Cousin Natalie came to live with us. She was a distant cousin of my mother's, a woman of about 30, unmarried and childless, who had offered to help care for the house and the sick woman. Natalie was a quiet woman with quick movements and watchful eyes that seemed to register everything. She and my mother would spend hours whispering in the bedroom, and when I approached, they would immediately fall silent. "What do you talk about so much?" I asked Natalie once while we were washing clothes together. She looked at me strangely, almost with pity. "Grown-up things, girl. Your mother is just worried about the future." That night, I woke up to the sound of voices coming from the kitchen. I got up carefully so as not to make the floorboards creak and went to my bedroom door, which I left slightly ajar. From there, I could hear Natalie and my father talking. "She's not in her right mind, Joseph," Natalie was saying. "The disease and the medicines are affecting her head. You can't take seriously what she says. And what do I do?" My father's voice was a trembling whisper. "She controls everything, the money, the house, the girl. If I go against her, God knows what might happen. Think of Lucy. She's just a child. It's for her that I endure. If it were just for me." The rest of the conversation was lost when they lowered their voices even further. I returned to bed confused and frightened. What were they talking about? What was my mother planning that left my father so terrified? The next day, I noticed there was even more tension in the air. My father avoided being alone with me more than ever. Natalie observed me with an expression that mixed concern and contained anger. And my mother was smiling in a way I had never seen before. It was that week that her illness worsened dramatically. Dr. Albert began coming every day, sometimes twice a day. Advanced tuberculosis, I heard him tell my father one afternoon. It might be time to prepare her for the hospital in Portland. We don't have more resources here. My mother flightly refused to go to the hospital. "I'll die in my house, in my bed," she declared with that authority that not even the disease had managed to diminish. And so it was. She deteriorated rapidly, losing weight until she became almost a skeleton covered by yellowish stretched skin. The cough became constant and often came with blood. On a particularly cold afternoon, as I was lighting the wood stove, Natalie entered the kitchen with a grave expression. "Your mother wants to talk to you," she said in a tone that chilled me inside. I entered the room where my mother was. The smell of sickness and medicine was so strong it made me nauseated. She was propped up on pillows with her gray hair stuck to her sweaty forehead. Her eyes, however, were more light and alert than in recent months. "Come closer," she ordered. When I approached the bed, she grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. Her fingers were like claws, cold and dry. "You know I'll die soon, don't you?" It wasn't a real question. I felt unable to speak. "Your life will change when I'm gone," she continued with a harsh voice. "I'm taking care of that. Your father is weak. Always has been. He doesn't know how to make decisions. Doesn't know how to do anything without someone telling him. You're just like him." I remained silent, feeling tears rising but refusing to let them fall. I knew crying would only irritate her more. "But don't worry," she smiled. A smile that made me think of snakes. "I have plans for you too. Plans that will ensure everything continues as it should even after I'm gone." She released me with a push. "Now go and tell your father to come here. I have matters to discuss with him." I left the room trembling. My father was in the living room sitting in our only armchair with a lost look. "Dad," I called softly, "she wants to talk to you." He raised his eyes to me, and what I saw there was pure terror. At that moment I understood that he knew what she was planning, and was terrified. "Will everything be okay, Dad?" I asked in a childish impulse to seek comfort. He stood up with difficulty, as if each movement were painful. He placed his hand on my shoulder for a brief second. A light touch almost ghostly. "Pray, daughter," was all he said before going to the room where my mother waited. That night, I heard my father crying in the tool shed. A convulsive, desperate crying like I had never heard before. I wanted to go to him, comfort him somehow. But something told me he didn't want to be found, didn't want to explain the reason for that despair. So I stayed in my room, hugging my pillow, feeling that something terrible was about to happen, and it was. The worst was yet to come. In the days that followed, our house became an even darker place. It was as if the very air was poisoned with my mother's obscure plans. Cousin Natalie began to lip me with a mixture of pity and disgust that I didn't understand. Sometimes she would open her mouth, as if wanting to tell me something important, but would quickly restrain herself, shake her head, and leave muttering prayers. My father walked like a ghost through the house with deep dark circles and trembling hands. He began to drink more, not much since my mother wouldn't tolerate it, but enough for me to notice the faint smell of whiskey when he returned from work. His hands, always steady despite their gentleness, now trembled when holding a cup or a fork. It was during this time that I began to hear conversations between my mother and Uncle Herman, her older brother, who lived in Medford, the neighboring town. He now came every week, and the two would lock themselves in the bedroom for hours. Uncle Herman was the opposite of my father, tall, bulky, with a strong voice that made the walls of our fragile wooden house vibrate. He had never much liked me, and now seemed to avoid me completely. When our eyes met, he quickly looked away as if ashamed of something. One afternoon, while washing clothes in the backyard tub, I accidentally overheard a conversation between him and my mother through the half-open bedroom window. "So, it's all arranged, Irene?" Uncle Herman's deep voice asked. "Everything," my mother answered with that voice from disease. "Joseph will do exactly what I tell him. He always has. And the girl won't cause problems." There was a pause and then my mother's dry laugh. A terrible sound that seemed more like a coughing fit. "That one is even meaner than her father. She'll do what she's told, as she always has. And if she doesn't..." Uncle Herman's voice had a tone that gave me chills. "Then you know what to do," my mother replied, so low I could barely hear. "Nobody will disrespect my wishes. Not even after I'm dead." I dropped the sheet I was wringing, feeling a chill run through my entire body. What were they talking about? What kind of plan was my mother devising from her deathbed? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there listening to the sounds of the house, the floorboards creaking with the wind, the tick-tock of the kitchen clock, the heavy, difficult breathing of my mother in the next room, and something else. The muffled sound of someone crying. I got up silently and followed the sound to the kitchen. My father was sitting at the table with his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. There was a bottle of whiskey on the table, more empty than full. I had never seen him like this, so completely broken. "Dad," I called softly, hesitantly. He raised his head suddenly, startled. His eyes were red and swollen, his face marked by trails of tears that gleamed in the faint moonlight coming through the window. "Lucy," he said, and there was so much despair in his voice that I felt my heart tighten. "You should be sleeping." I approached slowly and sat in the chair next to him. "What's happening, Dad? Why are you like this?" He remained silent for so long that I thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he passed his hand over his face as if trying to wipe away not just the tears, but some terrible thought. "Your mother is dying," he said at last. "I know. But it's not just that. There's something else." "Yes, there is something else." He looked at me differently then, as if really seeing me for the first time in a long time. His hand trembled as he took mine. "Lucy," he began, but was interrupted by a noise coming from my mother's room, a dull thud, as if something had fallen. "Joseph," her voice called, weak, but authoritative as always. "Come here now." My father released my hand as if he had received a shock. He stood up quickly, knocking over the chair in the process. "Go to sleep," he muttered, avoiding my gaze. "We'll talk tomorrow." But we didn't talk. The next day, he left before dawn for work and only returned when it was already dark. In the days that followed, he seemed to do everything to never be alone with me, and my mother's health visibly worsened with each day. Dr. Albert now came every day. One afternoon, after examining my mother, he called my father and Uncle Herman for a conversation in the living room. I pretended to clean the hallway so I could hear. "It's a matter of days," he said quietly. "The lungs are almost completely compromised. She's suffering a lot. if she would agree to be transferred to the hospital. She doesn't want to, Uncle Herman replied dryly, and we respect her wishes. Then make her as comfortable as possible, the doctor sighed. I've increased the morphine dose. It will help with the pain. When the doctor left, Uncle Herman grabbed my father's arm forcefully. Remember what we agreed on, Joseph? He said in a low but threatening voice. What you promised her. My father didn't answer, just bowed his head in submission as he always did. The next morning, I woke to screams. I ran to my parents' bedroom and found my mother sitting up in bed, agitated, as she hadn't been for weeks. Her skeletal face was contorted in an expression of fury, and she was pointing an accusing finger at my father, who was standing beside the bed, pale as a ghost. You thought I wouldn't find out. She screamed with her voice broken by the disease. Did you think you could deceive me? What are you talking about, Irene? My father asked, genuinely confused. The tickets you bought. Do you think I'm a fool? Natalie told me everything. My father palled even more if that was possible. I don't know what you're talking about, he tried, but his voice betrayed him. My mother laughed. That dry, cruel laugh that seemed to scratch the air. You were going to run away, weren't you? Take the girl and run as soon as I died before Herman could fulfill our agreement. It was at this moment that I noticed Natalie standing at the door with her eyes downcast and lips pressed tight. Had it been her? Had she told my mother something? Irene, please, my father begged. You're not thinking straight. The disease, the medicines. Shut up, she shouted with such force that she began to cough violently, blood stains appearing on the white sheet. When she finally recovered, her eyes gleamed with a fury I had never seen before, not even in her worst days. You have never disobeyed me, Joseph. Never, and you won't start now. She turned to me then, and her gaze pierced me like an ice spear. And you ungrateful girl, conspiring behind your own mother's back after all I've done for you. She has nothing to do with this. My father intervened, placing himself between us. It was my idea. My mother ignored his protest. Herman, she called, and to my surprise, my uncle almost immediately, as if he had been waiting just outside. Take her away from here. I don't want to see her face right now. Uncle Herman advanced and grabbed my arm, so tightly that it left purple marks. He dragged me out of the room, through the hallway to the kitchen, where he pushed me against the wall. Do you have any idea what you've done? He growled, his face so close to mine that I could smell the tobacco on his breath. Your mother is dying, and you're plotting to run away after all we've arranged. I don't know what you're talking about. I managed to say, despite the fear that paralyzed me. He studied me for a moment, eyes narrowed. It's true, isn't it? Your father didn't have the courage to tell you. He laughed, a humorless sound, typical of him, always too weak to do what needs to be done. From my parents' bedroom now came sounds of discussion, my mother's weak but determined voice, and my father's muffled protests. I tried to break free, but my uncle tightened his grip on my arm. Stay away from your father today, he ordered. If I catch you speaking with him alone, I'll personally ensure you both regret it. Understand? I nodded, unable to speak. Good. He released me with a push. Now go to work. The house won't clean itself. I spent the rest of the day in a trance, performing the same mechanical tasks as always, but with my mind in turmoil. My father had planned our escape. Where would we go? And what was this arrangement that my mother and Uncle Herman kept mentioning? At night, when I had finally finished washing the dinner dishes, which almost no one had eaten, Natalie came to me, looked around, making sure we were alone, and spoke in a very low voice. Your father is in the tool shed. Go talk to him now while your mother is sleeping. But Uncle Herman said, forget what that demon said. She replied with a ferocity that surprised me. Go. Your father needs to talk to you. It's important. I hesitated, torn between the fear of disobeying my uncle and the urgency in Natalie's words. She noticed my indecision and held my shoulders. Girl, she said, looking directly into my eyes. You have no idea what they're planning for you. Go talk to your father now. There was so much urgency in her voice that I hesitated no longer. I went out the back door and ran to the tool shed, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. My father was there, sitting on an old crate with a empty bottle of whiskey beside him. When he saw me enter, his face lit up for a brief moment, but soon returned to the tormented expression of before. Lucy, he said using the forbidden nickname. You shouldn't be here. Natalie sent me. I explained, approaching cautiously. Dad, what's going on? What plan is it that Mother and Uncle Herman keep talking about? Where did you want to take us? He lowered his head, hiding his face in his callous hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was choked. Your mother, she wants me too. He couldn't finish the sentence. A sob shook his shoulders. I can't, Lucy. I can't do this to you. That's why I bought tickets to Seattle for us to run away as soon as it was all over. A chill ran down my spine. Do what to me, Dad? What does she want you to do? He raised his head then, and what I saw in his eyes left me cold. A mixture of shame, despair, and absolute terror. She wants, he began, but was interrupted by the sound of the shed door being violently opened. Uncle Herman stood in the entrance, his face contorted with fury. What did I say about you two talking alone? He roared, advancing toward us. My father stood up quickly, placing himself between me and my uncle. Leave her alone, Herman. She has nothing to do with this. She has everything to do with it. My uncle replied, taking another step forward. And you know it. Your mother is calling girl. Go now. No, my father said with a firmness he had never shown before. She stays here with me. The two men stared at each other for a long moment. For the first time in my life, I saw my father not back down, not lower his eyes. For an instant, I thought he would finally confront my mother's brother, that he would defend himself and me. But then, as a cruel reminder of reality, we heard my mother's scream coming from the house. Joseph, come here now. And as always, as it had been for his entire life, my father obeyed. His shoulders fell, the brief courage vanished, and he headed toward the house like a condemned man on his way to the gallows. Uncle Herman smiled, a cold, satisfied smile. See, in the end, he always obeys, always. And at that moment, looking at my father's bent back as he walked away, I understood our fate was sealed. Whatever my mother's terrible plan was, it would be fulfilled, because in that house her will was law. Even on the verge of death, her reign of terror continued. The worst was yet to come, and I was completely alone. That night is etched in my memory like a scar that never completely fades. Winter was punishing outside with a cutting wind that made our old wooden house moan as if it too were suffering. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of sickness, medicine, and dark secrets. After my father left the shed, answering my mother's call, I remained paralyzed, not knowing what to do. Uncle Herman stared at me with a cold smile on his lips, as if savoring my despair. Now you understand, don't you? He said, coming so close I could feel his hot, sour breath. Your father will never defend you. He's too weak for that, always has been. I backed up until I felt the rough wall of the shed against my back. There was no one to run. What do you want from me? I managed to ask, my voice almost disappearing from fear. He tilted his head, studying me like a predator studies its prey. It's not what we want from you, girl. It's what your mother wants for you. And what she wants, she always gets. At that moment, we heard a scream coming from the house. Not the authoritative call from before, but a scream of sharp pain that cut through the night like a knife. My mother. Uncle Herman quickly moved away. Stay here, he ordered. Don't leave this shed until someone comes to get you. And he ran toward the house, leaving me alone in the darkness of the shed, with only a weak kerosene lamp illuminating the space. I trembled from cold and fear, hugging my own body while trying to understand what was happening. I don't know how long I stayed there, minutes or hours. Time seemed distorted. I heard excited voices coming from the house, doors slamming, hurried footsteps. Something serious was happening. Was my mother dying at that very moment? Suddenly, the shed door opened. It was Natalie, pale as a ghost, with her shawl wrapped around her thin shoulders to protect her from the cold. Come, she said, extending her hand. Your mother is asking for you and your father. She's very ill. I followed Natalie in silence, crossing the dark yard to the lit house. In the kitchen, Dr. Albert was preparing something in a syringe, his skilled hands working quickly. He glanced at me and his face showed a compassion that frightened me even more. Go, he said gently. She wants to see you both. There's not much time left. The hallway leading to my parents' bedroom never seemed so long to me. Each step was like walking toward a precipice that I knew existed, but couldn't see. Natalie guided me, holding my shoulder firmly, as if fearing I might run away at any moment. When we entered the room, The scene I found has been forever imprinted in my memory. My mother was in bed, paler and more skeletal than ever, with blood stains on the sheet and her face. But her eyes, those eyes that always terrorized me, were more alive and alert than in recent weeks, gleaming with a feverish determination. My father stood beside the bed, his hands trembling so much that he needed to hold them together. His face was wet with tears, but not of sadness, of pure terror. Uncle Herman was on the other side of the bed, like a sinister guardian, with his arms crossed and an impatient expression on his face. Finally, my mother said when she saw me, her voice almost a hoarse whisper, "Come closer, girl. Both of you, I want you to stand here side by side." I obeyed automatically. Years of conditioning making me follow her orders without question. I stood beside my father, feeling him tremble. He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the floor as if he couldn't bear what was about to happen. "Joseph," my mother called, and my father flinched as if he had been slapped. "Look at me when I talk to you." Slowly, painfully, he raised his eyes. I saw tears silently streaming down his face. "You know what you have to do," she said. Not as a question, but as a statement. "What we arranged, what you promised." My father didn't answer, but a sob escaped his lips. "I'm dying," my mother continued, her voice gaining strength despite the weakness of her body. "Tonight, tomorrow, maybe in 2 days. It doesn't matter. What matters is what happens afterward, and you will do exactly what I ordered. Repeat it to me, Joseph." I want the girl to hear it, too. A heavy silence fell over the room. The only sound was my mother's difficult breathing and the wind howling outside. "I can't," my father finally said, so low I could barely hear. My mother's face contorted with anger. "What? Repeat that. I can't do this, Irene." He said a little louder, still not looking at me. "It's not right. It never was." My mother tried to rise in bed, but she was too weak. Instead, she pointed an accusing finger at him like a witch casting a curse. You swore you would take care of her the way I wanted after I was gone. That you would keep her under control. That you would marry her to who I chose." Marry? What was she talking about? Marry who? As if reading my thoughts, my mother turned her feverish eyes to me. "Yes, you fool. It's all arranged. As soon as I die, you'll marry your Uncle Herman. He will keep you in line as I always did since your father is too weak for that." I felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. Marry my uncle, a man of almost 50 whom I had always feared. I looked at Uncle Herman, who was staring at me with a perverse smile on his lips. Suddenly, all the times he had looked at me strangely, all the comments, all the veiled threats made a terrible sense. No, the word escaped my lips before I could contain it. "No, I won't." The slap came so fast, I didn't even see Uncle Herman's hand move. My face burned with the impact, and I staggered backward, dazed. "You'll do what you're told," he growled. "You always have." It was at this moment that something broke inside my father. Something that had been bent, crushed, suffocated by years of submission. With a movement I never expected from him, my father pushed Uncle Herman away from me. "Don't touch her," he said in a voice I didn't recognize. Firm, determined, almost fierce. Uncle Herman seemed as surprised as I was, but quickly recovered. "Have you lost your mind, Joseph? Forgot who's in charge here?" "I'm in charge of my daughter," my father replied, placing himself between me and my uncle. "And she's not going to marry anyone against her will." A strange sound came from the bed, a mixture of laughter and cough. My mother was watching us, her eyes gleaming with a sick fury. "You were always a coward, Joseph," she said, each word dripping poison. "You never had the courage to face me, and now you think you can." In my final hour, my father turned to her, and something in his face had changed. Years of fear and submission giving way to a quiet determination. "I'm tired, Irene," he said simply. "Tired of being afraid. Tired of letting you destroy our lives. It's over." My mother remained still for a moment, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Then her face contorted into a mask of pure hatred. "Grab them," she ordered Uncle Herman. "Lock them both up. After I die, you do what you want with her and with him too." Uncle Herman advanced, but my father didn't back down. Instead, he grabbed my arm. "Lucy, run," he said, his eyes fixed on my uncle. "Go to the shed and wait for me. She's not going anywhere." Uncle Herman growled, advancing further. What happened next was so fast I could barely process it. My father, that gentle man who had never raised his voice, much less his hand, grabbed the lamp from the bedside table and threw it at Uncle Herman. The object hit my uncle in the face, making him stagger backward, too surprised to immediately react. "Run!" my father shouted, pushing me toward the door. I ran like I had never run before through the hallway, crossing the kitchen where Natalie stood with wide eyes, and went out into the freezing night. Behind me, I heard shouts, the sound of things breaking, a fight. I reached the tool shed and hid in the dark, trembling with fear and cold. The minutes dragged on like hours. What was happening in the house? Was my father okay? And what would we do now? After what seemed like an eternity, the shed door opened. I shrank even more in the dark, terrified it might be Uncle Herman. "Lucy," my father's voice called softly, "are you here?" I came out of my hiding place, tears of relief streaming down my face. "Dad, what happened? Are you okay?" In the weak light of the kerosene lamp, I could see that no, he wasn't okay. There was blood running from a cut on his forehead, and he was holding his arm in a way that suggested it was hurt. But his eyes were different. For the first time in my life, there was no fear in them. "We don't have much time," he said hurriedly. "Your mother, she had another attack. The doctor is with her now and Herman too, but he'll come looking for us soon. We have to go now." "Go where?" "Far away from here, as far as possible." He moved through the shed with an urgency he had never shown before, picking up an old canvas bag. "Take only the essentials, a change of clothes, anything of value we can sell later. Quick, Lucy." As I hurriedly gathered a few things, a change of clothes, my only good coat, a small box where I kept the silver medal that had been my grandmother's. My father continued to talk if he needed to explain, as if he needed me to understand. "I always knew it wasn't right," he said, his voice trembling. "The way she treated you, how she treated me. But I was so afraid of her. So afraid of what she might do, and when she got sick, I thought we would finally be free. But then she started with this plan of wanting you to be with Herman after she died." "Why?" I asked, still trying to understand why she wanted this control. My father answered simply. "Even after death, she wanted to control our lives. And Herman, he was always like her, cruel, dominating, the two of them together. I couldn't let that happen to you. I couldn't." He closed the canvas bag with our few possessions and looked at me. "Really?" Looked at me for the first time in a long time. "Forgive me for not protecting you before," he said, and his voice broke. "For being weak for so long." "You're protecting me now," I replied, feeling the tears return to my eyes. A noise coming from the house made us freeze. Excited voices, footsteps. "Let's go," my father said, grabbing the bag with one hand and my arm with the other. Through the shed's back door quit. And so on a freezing winter night, we left behind the house that had been our prison for so many years. We fled into the darkness, with just the clothes on our backs, a few possessions, and for the first time, a spark of hope. But that wouldn't be the last time we'd see Uncle Herman. No, our escape was just beginning. And the terror we left behind would soon be on our trail, determined to fulfill my mother's last order, even after she was no longer there to see it. The night we fled from home was the longest of my life. The sky was starless, covered by heavy winter clouds, as if even nature was conspiring to hide our escape. We left through the back of the shed, sneaking between the shadows of the pine trees that surrounded our property. My father guided me firmly despite his injured arm, and the cut on his forehead that was still bleeding. He seemed to know every rock, every fallen log, even in the almost complete darkness. Years working at the lumber mill had given him a knowledge of the forest that now became our salvation. "Where are we going, Dad?" I asked in a whisper as we moved farther and farther away from the only home I had known. "To the station," he replied, his voice low but determined. "There's a freight train that passes at midnight heading to Portland. I know Nolan, one of the guards. He can let us board, and after that we'll go to Seattle, as I had planned. I have a distant cousin there, Irving. We've never met in person, but we've exchanged letters over the years. He can shelter us until we find our way." The cold cut like a razor. I was wearing only the simple dress I wore at home and the coat I had hastily grabbed. My feet and worn shoes were already numb, but fear prevented me from complaining or asking to rest. We walked for almost 2 hours through the woods, avoiding roads and known paths. My father would occasionally stop, turning to listen for sounds of pursuit. "Herman knows these woods almost as well as I do," he explained, and he has friends in the local police. We need to be careful. When we finally spotted the faint lights of the small pioneerage station, my heart was beating so hard it felt like it would jump out of my mouth. The station was practically deserted at that hour with only a sleepy guard in the control booth. Stay here, my father instructed, hiding me behind a pile of sawed timber waiting for shipment. I'll talk to Nolan. If anything goes wrong, if you see any sign of trouble, run east, following the tracks. There's a river a few miles away. Follow it to the next town. He left me there, trembling, not just from cold, but from pure terror. The minutes dragged on like hours as I watched my father stealthily approach the booth where the guard was. I saw when they greeted each other, when my father anxiously gestured, pointing in the direction where I was hidden. The guard shook his head negatively several times, but my father pleaded. Finally, I saw the guard sigh and make a gesture of agreement. My father quickly returned to my hiding place, relief stamped on his exhausted face. It worked. He whispered, Nolan will let us board the freight car, but we have to be quick and silent. The train arrives in 20 minutes and stays only for 5. He won't report us, I asked, still distrustful after a lifetime of being taught not to trust anyone. No, my father assured me. Nolan has his own reasons for disliking Herman, something related to a land dispute years ago. Besides, he hesitated. I gave him my father's gold watch. It was the only valuable thing I had. That watch was my father's most precious treasure. The only reminder of the man who had taught him kindness, before the world crushed it. Knowing he had parted with it for me made my heart ache. When the train finally arrived, noisy and imposing in the silent night, we followed the plan. Nolan quickly led us to a half-empty freight car among bales of hay. Stay quiet, he warned. The inspections in Medford. Hide well. The car was cold and uncomfortable, smelling of hay and damp wood, but it represented our freedom, our chance to escape. When the train began to move, jolting along the tracks, my father hugged me for the first time in years since I was too small to understand the world around me. Everything will be okay now, Lucy, he whispered, though his voice betrayed his uncertainty. We're starting over, just the two of us. The journey to Portland was an ordeal. Hidden among the cargo, fearing discovery at each stop, we endured hunger, cold, and fear. In Medford, as Nolan had warned, there was an inspection. Agents walked through the cars with flashlights, and we remained motionless, barely breathing, embraced in the tight space between 2 hay bales. One of the inspectors came so close that I could see the dust dancing in the light of his flashlight. By a miracle, he didn't see us. We arrived in Portland the next morning, exhausted and hungry. My father had only a few coins in his pocket. The rest of our savings was hidden in the lining of his jacket along with the tickets to Seattle, which he had bought weeks before. We have to be careful, he said, as we bought bread and milk at a bakery near the station. Herman may have alerted the authorities. Your uncle has influence, knows people. We spent the day hiding in a small park, trying not to attract attention, waiting for the night train to Seattle. My father cleaned the cut on his forehead with water from a public fountain, and I tried to fix my hair and clothes to look less suspicious. It was that afternoon, sitting on a secluded bench in the park, that my father finally told me everything. Your mother was always different, he began, his eyes fixed on some distant point. When I met her, I confused her coldness with strength, her cruelty with determination. She came from an important family in the region, and I was just a sawmill worker. I thought I was lucky that she noticed me. He sighed, passing his hand over his tired face. At first, I thought I could change her with love and patience, but I soon understood there was no warmth in her to be awakened. When you were born, I hoped a child might soften her, but she only got worse, transferring to you the same control she exercised over me. Why did you stay? I asked the question that had tormented me for years. Why didn't you leave for you? He answered simply. I knew that if I left, she would discharge all her bitterness on you. And then it was fear of what she might do, of what she and her family might do. Herman always made it clear that if I tried to take her or you, there would be consequences. He paused as if measuring his next words. When your mother got sick, I thought we would finally be free. But then a few months ago, she started with that monstrous idea. She said she had arranged everything for after she died, that you would stay with Herman, that you would marry, that he would take care of you the right way. I was supposed to agree to obey as I always did. A shiver ran down my spine hearing those words. At first I pretended to agree. He continued, buying time while planning our escape. I bought the tickets, saved every penny I could hide from her. But then Natalie discovered and told your mother. Why would Natalie do that? I asked, confused. She seemed to want to help us in the end. Natalie has her own game. My father explained. At first, she was loyal to your mother. They are cousins after all. But when she fully understood the plan to marry you to Herman, something changed in her. I think she had a similar experience in the past, something in her expression when she talked about him. There was fear and disgust. The distant whistle of a train interrupted our conversation. My father checked the station clock visible from the park. It's time, he said, standing up and picking up our small bag. The train to Seattle leaves in 40 minutes. But fate had other plans for us. When we approached the station, my father suddenly pulled me behind a column. Don't look now, he whispered, but Herman is there on the platform with 2 men I don't know. My blood froze. How had he found us so quickly? What do we do now? I asked, feeling panic grow. My father was silent for a moment, thinking quickly. Let's go to the bus station, he decided. It's farther, but it might be our only chance. We have enough money for bus tickets. We skirted the station, taking care not to be seen, and walked hurriedly through the streets of Portland. The city was large and strange to me, who had never left Pine Ridge. Each corner, each unknown face seemed a potential threat. At the bus station, we discovered that the next bus to Seattle would leave only the next morning. We can't wait that long, my father muttered, studying the schedule board with increasing desperation. Herman will find us. It was then that we saw a bus leaving in an hour for Eugene. It's not where we plan to go, my father said. But it's away from here, and from there we can continue south, maybe even cross into California if necessary. We bought the tickets with what was left of our money, and hid in an isolated corner of the bus station, always vigilant, always alert to any sign of our pursuer. Each minute was agony, each unknown face a possible threat. When we finally boarded the bus to Eugene, I couldn't relax until the wheels started turning, and the city was left behind. My father had my hand the entire way as if he feared I might disappear if he let me go. He won't give up, will he? I asked at one point when the bus lights were dimmed for the night journey. My father looked out the window at the darkness swallowing the road. No, he answered honestly. Not for a long time. For Herman, it's not just about what your mother wanted. It's about pride, about control, and about you, about possessing you. Then we'll never be safe. He turned to me then, and for the first time since I had known him, I saw genuine determination in his eyes. We will be. I promise you, Lucy. I'll keep you safe, even if I have to run to the ends of the earth. And he kept that promise in his own way. The years that followed were of constant movement, of always looking over our shoulder, of new cities, new names, new lives built from scratch, only to be abandoned when signs of danger appeared. From Eugene to Grants Pass. From Grants Pass to Medford, always heading south, always one step ahead of our pursuers. We learned through a newspaper that my mother had passed away that same night. We fled. Prominent peerage teacher succumbs after long illness, the small note said. There was no mention of a missing daughter or a fugitive husband. The family must have hushed up the scandal, preserving appearances as they always had, but Herman never forgot, never forgave. For years, we heard rumors that he was still looking for us. Sometimes we thought we had seen him at a bus station, in a small town square, and that was enough to make us leave again. Until one day when I was almost 20, my father made the bravest decision of all to stop running. We were in Pineville, a small and quiet place in rural Kentucky where nobody knew us. I'm tired, Lucy, he said with a sad smile. Tired of running. If Herman finds us here, then so be it. I'll face him head on, as I should have done a long time ago. And that's how we began our real life, in a small wooden house on the outskirts of Pineville. My father got a job at a local sawmill. I completed my studies through night school and began teaching young children. For the first time, we weren't just surviving, we were living. And when Herman finally found us 5 years later, he was no longer the threatening man I remembered. Time and resentment had consumed him, making him a bitter drunk who could barely stand. He appeared at our door on a rainy afternoon, soaked and stumbling. "I came to fulfill the promise," he said, his voice slurred from alcohol. My father, who had faced his own fear for so long, just looked the pathetic man at our door and said, "Go away, Herman. It's over. She's gone, and her power over us is gone, too." Uncle Herman tried to advance but tripped over his own feet and fell in the mud. My father could have taken advantage of that moment to avenge all the years of terror. Instead, he simply helped him up, gave him some money, and sent him back to the bus station. "Why?" I asked when he returned. After all he did, all he tried to do. My father smiled, that gentle smile that had been so rare in my childhood, and now was part of his face every day. "Because we're finally free, Lucy. Truly free. And freedom is being able to choose not to be like them." It was the last time we saw Uncle Herman. We learned years later that he died alone, consumed by alcohol and the hatred that never left him. But us, we moved on, building the life my father had always dreamed for us. A simple but dignified life where fear didn't dominate our days. And so, my dear viewers, life followed its course. In Pineville, we finally found a place to call home. With time, the shadows of our past became more distant, like those dark clouds that move away after the storm. My father rebuilt his life with a dignity that had always existed within him, but could only flourish far from my mother's oppression. At the sawmill where he worked, he earned everyone's respect for his dedication and knowledge of wood. Gradually, from a simple employee, he became a manager, and years later, one of the minority partners in the business. I became a teacher, as my mother had been, but in a completely different way. While she used fear to control her students, I chose the path of affection and understanding. For almost 40 years, I taught elementary school children in the local school, seeing entire generations grow up under my care. Many of today's children's parents and even grandparents were once my students. At 28, I met Thomas, a kind man who worked with my father at the sawmill. Our love story was simple and true, as love stories should be after so much storm. He knew about my past, the invisible scars I carried, and loved me with a patience that healed many of the old wounds. We married in a simple ceremony with my father walking me down the aisle with tears in his eyes, tears of joy for the first time. Thomas and I had 2 children, Claire and Oliver. I raised them with all the love I never received from my mother, promising myself they would never know the kind of fear that dominated my childhood. Today they're grown, each following their path. Oliver lives in Louisville with his wife and twin daughters, my granddaughters Maline and Celia. Claire stayed closer, living right here in Pineville with her husband and my grandson Timothy. The one I mentioned helps me with Dad because yes, my father is still alive. At 1 and 2. He's a miracle of persistence, as if determined to extract from life every moment of peace that was denied him for so many years. Thomas passed away 15 years ago from a massive heart attack while working. It was an immense pain. But my father was there to support me, as he always had been since our escape. 5 years ago, my father suffered a severe stroke. The doctor said that at his age it was unlikely he would survive. But he was always stronger than he appeared. He survived. Although the right side of his body was paralyzed and his ability to speak drastically reduced. When it became clear that he would need constant care, I didn't hesitate for a second. The man who risked everything to save me deserved nothing less than my total dedication in his moments of fragility. Today, our routine is peaceful and marked by care. I wake up before dawn, check how he spent the night, administer medications, and prepare his breakfast. I talk to him while he eats, telling him the small news from the previous day, talking about my grandchildren, about the weather, thing that might interest him, or simply fill the silence. Nurse Judy comes every morning to help with the bath and physical therapy exercises. She's a dedicated woman who treats my father with the dignity he deserves. After she leaves, I read to him for an hour or 2. Sometimes it's local newspaper news. Other times, passages from the Bible he always appreciated or stories we've been collecting throughout life. Although he can't respond much, his eyes tell me everything I need to know, the gratitude and peace in them. In the afternoon, when the weather is good, I take his wheelchair to the porch where we can appreciate the view of the distant mountains and feel the fresh breeze coming down from the pine forests. There we stay, sometimes in silence, sometimes with my stories filling the air. On special days when he has more energy, I can see a smile forming in the corner of his mouth, that same gentle smile that saved me so many times during childhood. My neighbor Dorothy, a widow like me, always brings a free-range chicken or fresh vegetables from her garden to make a strong broth for your father. She says solidarity here in Pennville is genuine and without fanfare. People know our story. Not all the dark details, of course, but enough to understand the devotion I have for my father. At night after dinner, we sit in the living room to listen to some radio. It's an old habit of ours since the times we settled here. My father always liked country music programs, those songs that talk about the simple life of the countryside. Now, even if he can't sing along as before, his fingers still mark the rhythm on the arm of the wheelchair. A small but precious sign that that gentle man is still there inside the fragile body. When I help him lie down, I always lean in to kiss his forehead and say the same words. Good night, Dad. Tomorrow is a new day. And he, even without being able to speak clearly, answers me with a handshake and a look that carries all the love in the world. No, our life is not luxurious nor extraordinary in the eyes of those who value material goods or great deeds. It's a simple life of everyday tasks and small joys. But for us who know the true meaning of fear and oppression, each peaceful day is a victory. Each moment of peace is an invaluable treasure. Looking back to that terrible night when we fled, I realized that my father didn't just save my physical life. He saved my ability to love, to trust, to live without fear. He gave me the chance to know what a true family is, what a true home is. And now caring for him in his final years, I feel I'm returning only a fraction of what he gave me. This is our story, my dear viewers. A story of darkness, yes, but also of light. A story that taught me that courage isn't always in great heroic gestures, but in the daily decision not to let oneself be consumed by fear and bitterness. My father, with all his apparent fragility, ended up being the bravest man I've ever known. You know, my dears, when I look back and see all we've been through, I've learned that it's never too late to start over. My father was over 50 when he finally found the courage to break the cycle of abuse and control that dominated our lives. 50 years old, and yet he had time to rebuild a dignified life, to meet grandchildren and even great-grandchildren. If you're watching me and living in a similar situation, where fear controls your steps and your breath, where someone exercises power over you in a sick way, I want you to know there's always a way out. It's not easy. It's not quick, but it exists. I've learned that age doesn't define our strength, but rather our ability to start over each day. There were moments when I thought we wouldn't survive the persecution, that fear would catch up with us. But we kept going, one step at a time. My wrinkles are maps of survival. Each one tells a story of pain overcome, and when I look at my father with his 102 years, I see his wrinkles as medals from a silent war he won. Not with violence, but with the firm decision to protect those he loved. Life has taught me that even in the deepest darkness, our inner light never goes out. Even in the years when we lived looking over our shoulder, fearing Herman would find us, we managed to find small joys, moments of peace, a beautiful sunset, a hug, a warm meal, simple things that, for those who have known true fear, have an incalculable value. I discovered that we are stronger than we imagine, especially when we think we can't take it anymore. My father, that man who seemed so fragile and submissive, found within himself a strength that no one, not even he, knew existed. And I, a frightened girl who measured each breath, learned to live without fear, to build a family based on love and respect. So, if you're going through difficult times, remember you're not alone. Seek help. Trust someone. Take one small step at a time. No matter where you are in the world, there are people and organizations ready to extend a hand. Abuse, whatever it may be, thrives in silence and isolation. Break that silence, even if your voice trembles in doing so. And before I finish, I want to ask you, my dear viewers who have followed me to this point, if this video touched your heart, if my story made any difference to you, please subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell. Each subscription is a sign that stories like mine matter, that we can help other people by sharing our experiences. Also, leave in the comments the word freedom. Only those who watch to the end will understand its true meaning for me. Do it now. Don't wait even one more minute. God bless you, my dear ones. Until the next video, God willing.